People working in forensics, what was the most shocking thing discovered in your lab? Years ago, when I was working as a DNA analyst, our lab received a limp Caesar salad from a local restaurant takeout box and all. Apparently, the guy who ordered the salad said that it was served with blood in it. The restaurant owner said not possible, and that the customer must have bled in it so that he wouldn't have to pay. The customer then decided to promptly bring his salad to our lab along with his DNA sample to prove it wasn't his. Turns out that it was, and he unknowingly bled into a salad somehow. Oh, there was also that one time a dad sent in a bunch of his daughter's soiled feminine hygiene products into the lab to test for semen. Most shocking thing, though, was the time a bunch of DNA samples came. To make a long story short, one large vehicle, lots of drugs, 2 strung out horny couples, 1 condom being passed back and forth, yes, flipped inside out, and 2 pregnant couples uncertain about the paternity of each baby. In doing my MS in forensic pathology and anthropology, there is a final practical exam component. The exam hauled in a large cardboard box, the type or size you would store documents in. When dumped on the table, it looked like a broken plant pot. No piece was bigger than 1.5 inches in diameter. He then goes, "Could you find all the pieces of example of bone and reconstruct it, please?" Turns out it was a 16-year-old girl whose boyfriend had caved her head in with a stone and cut her into tiny bits before burying her in a field. Only reason she was found was because her decomposing flesh caused the plants right near her body to be oddly large and lush for a dry, forgotten field. That he was the father. I'm a bookkeeper billing guy at a clinic, and we tested a baby to see if he was the father. Mom and dad were both blonde hair, wife had blue eyes, both looked super white. Kid was really black. Was tested earlier and he didn't have a condition, he was just black. The dad wanted a paternity test because when you have 2 white parents and a black kid, raises some questions. Turns out that mom had a black grandfather that didn't show up in their skin and that she didn't know about. Kid was biologically theirs, but just looked totally different. I was working as a scanning electron microscope technician for the R&D branch of a private company when the head scientist gave me an unknown sample to cut up and investigate. There was a bunch of layers of paint on it, and he wanted to know what elements were present. Most of the layers showed up as normal elements, O, Al, Cr, etc., but one layer had a peak at Pr, praseodymium, which is so rare that I had forgot that it was even an element. I thought I was going crazy, but my engineer double-checked and it was definitely there. Turns out, praseodymium is used in certain military-grade paints. So, not forensics entirely, and not me. I had a college professor that was pursuing her doctorate while working at the Mayo Clinic. Year after year, a man came in to be tested for a disorder or disease that killed his father at that very hospital. Year after year, he tested negative. But every year he got tested in an effort to stay ahead of it, because genetics. One year he tested negative as usual, but the staff had an idea. They cracked open the archives, dug his father's file out, and put it next to his. DNA wasn't even close. Poor guy has no idea his late father was never his biological father at all, and the hospital has no right or obligation to inform him. My friend's wife works in one. Getting blood samples from babies that tested positive for coke and meth was apparently fairly common, but the most recent shocking discovery was that the building's plumbing was done in such a way that chemical disposal could backflow into the water fountain drain, and management didn't really care. Had the honor of discussing with a soldier in charge of forensics for military examinations, and he told us this story. Death at a refugee camp. Woman, apparently dead in her sleep. The persons in charge of cleaning her body noticed semen in her genital areas and gave the alarm. Due to lack of personnel, the soldiers had to help a doctor coroner determine the cause of death. Heart failure. No signs of violence. At least 7 different male bioprints in her. They got very confused and could tell something was off, but not much more due to the language barrier. They then had the idea of calling a fake soldier and real translator on site to figure out what her family and countrymen were saying away from the identified translator's ears. Turns out, her father was a pimp, and he was prostituting her and her siblings for money under threats. There was a full network on camp he operated, and He had an absurd amount of cash hidden on him when he was arrested. He is now in jail in his country of origin, and his family have been offered protection by our government, but I don't know much else beyond that. A woman divorces man. They have a daughter. During the marriage, she files complaints saying he's abusive but never follows through. After divorce, she files a complaint saying her daughter, a child, was raped by her ex. The doctors found evidence that the girl was actually abused, but when samples were analyzed and everything investigated, they found out the mother was putting carrots in the girl's vagina to simulate rape in order to keep her and not share custody. Bitch. I'm not a forensic. I'm just a chemist at a lab. We were investigating a case of a serial killer that raped the victims before murdering them. We discovered traces of pepper in the victim's body. I mean, he could have gotten a pepper condom in any sex shop, but he just decided to put real pepper on the victim's genitals. Humans are without limits. Probably not the kind of forensics you were looking for, but my sister's a forensic accountant, and while working on an unrelated case, she decided to run the financials of the main suspect's associates. Well, one of them raised some red flags, so my sister looked closer into it. Turns out he was running a completely separate, multi-million-dollar scam unrelated to the original case that wasn't even on the department's radar. I only just started here, so what's shocking to me is probably super minor, but I had a decedent that died and was found with multiple bottles of isopropyl alcohol around her with straws in them. She literally was sipping isopropyl alcohol through straws. It obviously killed her, but I cannot get past the thought of that. How serious of an addiction do you have that doing something like that makes sense? Just the thought of doing that makes my stomach turn. My friend's ma used to work in forensics, and we got told a bunch of stories, the most memorable being of when they found the dead body of a girl hacked into bits inside a bin bag. They at first thought some sicko had murdered her and cut her up, like sickos do. But after further investigation, they discovered something in her lady parts along with a giant hole. Some sciencing later, and something was an acrylic nail. Turns out she and her girlfriend were doing it when her girlfriend's nail snapped and ripped her open from the inside and she bled out. The girlfriend, in a moment of panic, chopped her up and tried to dispose of the body. This is my grandfather's story. While he was working in forensics, he had to take a body found at the bottom of a lake. After checking it out, he apparently found that there was a Hot Wheels car lodged in the left lung. He assumed that they must have swallowed it while they were underwater.